Hey y'all, welcome to MAQR Industries. My name's Gary. I'm kicking things off right now. New channel. I wanted to start by getting a shop tour going. A place that I've been building out for I'd say 12 to 18 months or so to get this thing really, at least to the beginning, workable place that I wanted it to be. Hit on all the areas that I was after. Start of this company was really driven by multiple angles and multiple drivers behind it, from learning new skills, which was one of the early on pieces. I have a 6-year-old son. I want to be able to pass on skill sets to him that I already have, plus what I'll learn, some of the stuff him and I are going to learn together, but have things that he can move through life and carry on and take through and do whatever he wants to do with them, right? I wouldn't force it onto him, but just something that he would be able to have that in his backpack per se and use it as needed. And then just other angles that it led to with me trying to learn something new, constantly be moving forward. I'm not the type to typically just sit still and stay static and be like, hey, this is the capacity of what I know, and then that's it. I'm always trying to push the envelope and learn something new and try things new. So that was my intent of initially starting things out. A couple of projects I think led me into where I wanted to be with this. I was I have a Jeep, and I was going to do a lift on it, and one of the components was going to require welding to be done. And as I looked at, I can't weld. Okay, well, how many times have I walked through saying, I wish I could, like, I wish I could weld, or I wish I could do this, or I wish I knew how to do that. And I finally just said, you know what, rather than paying a shop to do the work on this thing, I'm going to go a different route and do something. I'll do a kit that doesn't require welding. And then I'm going to take the money I would have spent on labor, and I'm going to go buy myself a welder, and I'm going to teach myself to weld. So that was also one of my early on pieces where I was just like, the time is now that I got to get past the I wish I could, and start to get into a point where I can say, like, hey, if anything, I'm learning, or I'm applying a skill that I already knew. There was another piece where somebody I knew was getting a house remodel, and some of the work wasn't quite up to what my expected outcomes would be if you're paying somebody to do a job. And I just started to realize that, nobody's going to be pickier at doing a job than you yourself, right? Depending upon what your outcome is. Doesn't mean everything we do is going to be, top caliber, right? Sometimes it's just not needed. There's just certain things where we're like, hey, what I've just done with this is totally adequate. Like, I needed a spacer with a piece of wood. I do not need to have this to a precision within thousandths of 90 degrees. I just need a spacer. And so therefore, just a cut piece of wood is completely fine, right? So that was the other piece I was looking at, was how do I get things to where I wanted them to be? And that started me down this road of building out my shop space and looking at, the overall maker space. I can't stay dedicated to one specific kind of task. There's a lot of people out there, tremendous woodworkers or tremendous metal workers, that will always be tremendous metal and woodworkers, far beyond anything I could ever do. But I do like to work with wood, and I do like to work with metal, and I do want to have the ability to do to whatever it is that I'm working on, do those basic functions and get myself there. So I wanted to have a lot crammed into here, which leads into what this tour video is about, which is how do I take this 2-car garage and be able to add in all these kind of different stations, shall I say, where I've got, my regular hand tools for, say, mechanic work, or if I'm doing metalworking, I've got my lathe, and behind me I've got my mill, or if I'm doing woodworking, I've got a section over there. If I'm doing welding, I've got that. And so I think you'll see throughout here that I've got a lot crammed into a pretty small space. And, give an idea of like what my mindset is in building out a shop like this, which isn't for everybody. I think, I always think that, like, hey, if you like working on things, who wouldn't want a 10,000 square foot shop, with the biggest table saw you could possibly get, and the biggest, CNC, mill and or a CNC router or all the big equipment where you can literally just about do anything at the push of a button. I mean, yeah, that sounds gratifying and it sounds glorious, but it's also not reasonable, right? And it definitely wasn't reasonable here. So my mindset was how can I get as much into here as I possibly can and make this a lot of the areas multifunctional. Some are a little bit better than that. And then also the tooling. How do I end up with tooling? Most things when it comes to buying stuff, I am not I need this tool, let me go and either order it online brand new or go to a store and go buy it. That's my first line of attack for decades has always been, what's the used market going to look like, right? There's somebody out there that bought this same tool I'm looking for that tucked it away in their garage and literally almost never used it and had super light duty use. And that's usually what I'm after, is trying to find those used deals, let somebody else take the hit on the cost paying retail, and let me come in behind them and buy it up used. So most of the stuff that I built out in here is used. I mean, there's a handful of things that are new, but I also looked at, like, if I'm buying new, I'm not, unless there was like a part or a company that never put stuff on sale, I'm buying this stuff only when it's on sale. There's no way I'm going to pay the full retail price on it. Sorry, companies, but that's my thing, is how could I look at A, the used market, B, the on sale market as a way to get this stuff into the garage and into the shop space, and really at being able to be used within a, kind of within ever that budget is that you're setting. So that was it. And then as I had hit on about being kind of like multifunctional, not everything can do more than one thing, right? There are certain tools that are kind of a one-trick pony. You can only use it kind of one way for one thing. And I get that, but as much as I possibly could, I tried to look at ways that if I buy something, could it be used in more than just one operation? Can't always, right? So I'm going to have certain things you're going to be like, oh, but that can only be used for just that. Totally true. I get that, right? But a lot of the other stuff is I can use it in other areas of the shop, and I can use it in multiple operations or various different tasks, and maybe I'm using it in a less than traditional sense, but it allows me to be able to use that. So that was the other thing I tried to look at when building out shop space, building out which tools I was going to use. Is this an efficient production facility? No way in hell, right? Again, 10,000 square foot shop where you have a table saw that's literally set to do one operation and just rip through, kind of a sequence of cuts that are identical to one another, and you're rocking out 100 of those. I could set up to do that, but it's also going to have to tear down, and I can't leave it set up. I can't, sure, I could get through today, tomorrow, the next day, but at some point in time, that's going to have to break down. So the efficiency isn't totally there, but I tried to set it up as efficient as I could given the use case that I'm in. The other thing is everything's super modular in here, with the exception of the lathe, which will actually change, and I'll get this up onto a wheeled stance. I saw something recently on I'm trying to think somebody made a workbench, an awesome woodworking bench. Padilla, I think it was Padilla or something along those lines. Down in Australia, did this fantastic maple woodworking bench where they use these motorcycle lifts underneath as a way to lift up this like 600-pound bench. Awesome idea. So I'll probably steal that idea, so that when needed, this can quickly move whatever I need and then drop back down. But just about everything else in here besides that, and my mill and like air compressor tucked over here in the corner, everything is essentially mobile on wheels and relatively easy to move. And even the lathe, if I needed to move it, I could nudge it out of the way. All the other stuff is essentially on wheels, so that I can reconfigure as needed given the job that I'm doing, or if I needed to, for example, pull a car in for some reason, I could tuck everything up out of the way. Or if I walked out here and I was just bored one day and said, I need a new shop layout, I could completely do that within minutes, probably 59 minutes or less to reconfigure because of the fact everything is on wheels. And one of the more recent times when I did a little bit of a reconfiguration, I kind of came out here with this expectancy I was going to spend half a day, and I think I was done in like 40 minutes, and I moved a tremendous amount of stuff around just because it was all on wheels and it was easy to do. So that's kind of my mindset on shop, and I'll take you through kind of the different areas of what I have and my mindset behind it. Also a bit about why I wanted to start MAQR Industries. And we'll see, we're going to see where this ends up going. Not, it's not meant to be like a how to do things. I'm a believer that there's many ways to get to a kind of a final state. And we're all going to have different approaches to it. And, I always say there's probably a bigger there's a bigger list of things that we shouldn't do, right? Or wrong ways of doing things. Like, hey, don't rip a piece of plywood with your hand directly over it where the blade's going to catch it. Like, we know that's on a list of what not to do, but the list of like how to do things, that's constantly evolving, right? People are coming up with new techniques and new ways, and then technology and the betterment of some of the tooling that's out there is also allowing for us to change the way we approach things or do things on that. So that's my segue into this. We're going to do a shop walkthrough. It's a 2-car garage. It could only take so long to get us through this, but we'll go through kind of each of those sections, and I'll talk through and give a little bit of my input of why I set it up a certain way and how I see its use and go from there. And okay, a bit of an overview of just the general shop layout, and then we'll come back and kind of talk in details. My 360 accessible workbench area. I've got some stuff hanging on the walls for my track saw stuff that goes into there. A little shout out to my vintage scooter people, Lambrettas and Vespas. Keeping things on wheels so that they move out of the way. Gotta have the beer cooler. It's kind of not worth having this if you don't have the beer cooler. So buddy hooked me up with that. I've got my sewing equipment in there, and some of the stuff lays out into those drawers. A nice set of some vintage drawers, some of the tooling that comes up along there. I've got a nice layout here, and we'll talk a little bit more about how this section is probably my most multifunctional of all the areas within here. Back in here, I've got my kind of my dirty section where I'm running my grinder, my bandsaw, and a belt sander. Back over in here, I've got a couple of shopsmiths, which we'll talk a little bit about those as well. So I've got one that I just recently converted. I actually already recorded a video on doing that conversion where I shortened this by almost 2 feet, which sets me up really, really well. I've got my bigger shopsmith in here, table saw down in here, and then some more kind of storage that sets up to be really well for being in the particular area. So all of this is the storage for my shopsmith equipment. Got all like my cameras or my camera holders and such in here. Somehow my dial indicators ended up in this section. I don't know. Maybe I thought it looked cool at one point in time. 3D printer lives in there with a lot of the equipment down below it that is either 3D printer or kind of the arts and crafts from airbrush to just drawing things out. I've got my entertainment section in here, which we'll talk a bit about. My cabinets my tool chests that exist into here. And then back in here where we started out, right, is where kind of all the metal machining. I've got my South Bend lathe. I've got my Grizzly milling machine. I've got my drill press, air compressor. And then up top, I've actually got some nice benchtop equipment. Shoreline, another sewing machine there. Singer featherweight, and then just some more storage and stuff in there. So that gives you an idea of my general layout of what I've got. And to top this off, not only do I have to manage this as a workspace, I've got family, I've got a kid, and we've got bikes that we've got to hang out and some camping chairs and such like that. So I've tried to do what I can to lay this out and give myself kind of the most functional use that I can out of each area on there. So we're going to move over, talk a little bit about the workbench over in here, as well as kind of my layout with computer. All right, so this is where I actually spend probably the bulk of the time in my shop. It's the workbench where I'm either using this as a desk, I'm using this to work on just various small tasks, or if I've worked on something in another area, it somehow lands here for final assembly. So this is really kind of one of my main areas. I would call it the center of the shop without necessarily being the center of the shop, but it works really well in this particular case. I think one of the most difficult things is, especially in a small space, is don't clutter it up, right? You put one thing down and instantly it feels like you have a mess, but also to make sure I have 360 accessibility as much as possible, right? I do have, like, here's my surface plate. It lives here on a permanent basis. I tend to always have, this is a magnetic chuck, but I actually use it to hold this little miniature kind of small case vise. I've also run my light in here, and this has just found its way to essentially almost always being here. I've got my bolted down Wilton vise. I can still access from here, but it's definitely a little bit more on the crowded side of things. You'll see that I have this piece in here, but this is very quickly just everything's on wheels, right? I could pull this up out of the way and I'm back to being able to work immediately alongside that side of the table on that piece. I also set up back in here, I've got kind of my reference material for pieces that I need. So whether it was a job I was working on and I've printed out or handwritten out, either one, that'll pop into a binder so that I have it for future reference if I'm going to work on something that is the same or somewhat relatively similar. I'm a nerd, so I do have my ham radio. I am a ham radio operator, so I also have my ham radio station set up in here. So two different radios for that piece. And then just mostly entertainment, right? So I grabbed an old laptop that I had laying around. I was trying to be cheap. I'm like, I don't really want to buy a TV. I also was like, I don't want to necessarily, put much money into this. And I was like, oh, wait, I've got this old computer. I can go down and buy, I think I found a clearance monitor down one of the local stores, bought that, was able to hook that up. I already had the wireless mouse and keyboard left over from an old desktop that I was no longer using. So I just cannibalized all of this. And then I filter all the sound through this Makita speaker. And from there, I've got kind of all my entertainment. So YouTube's constantly playing. I'll have movies, I'll have music. Got to have those pieces in there, especially if you're out in your shop for kind of hours at a time. It could be whatever is on, right? So I really dig that. I also, constantly looking things up. So that's where I appreciate having moved to the computer versus going with a TV, is that I could jump in, look something up pretty quickly, and get myself back onto things there. But again, I try to keep this whole area as clutter-free as possible. It's not entirely, right? I got random things. I got my 3D printed Grogu. I think it's the obligatory Grogu that we've got to have into there. I've got various pieces of just metal sitting up here, and it's just intended almost to be a little bit of a motivator, right? Pick up this piece, and where I was doing some heat treating and looking at it and picking up various colors, the blues and the purples and the tans, and I just, occasionally I'll just look at that as a way to motivate and get myself moving into things or come up with ideas on what I should be doing. I already tucked this thing up out of the way and moved this, but this is a Festool, which I'm not associated with them, but I picked up this Festool, kind of like this folding, it's not really a workbench, but it's intended to be like you could throw down, full sheets of plywood, get those cut down. But what I've found, especially in here, because of the fact that it could collapse down really well, when I have my track saw set up, this can work really well to extend that workspace, because it rides the exact same height as the Festool MFT table. So I run two of those back to back, or side by side actually. And then this, as needed, if I'm cutting a long sheet, I can extend this out and it kind of works as a good in-feed, or I could flip it around to the outside and it can work as an out-feed. We'll also look a little bit at my table saw. I set my table saw so that it rides at the exact same height as this. So again, it could serve as an in feed or an out feed for my table saw again. So trying to look at ways that I can multi-function this piece. I can also just, open this up just a little bit. It's big enough to go with a 4x8, but I could go, super small, throw a piece of board on here, and I've got this little small extension table to my workbench that's needed. And the fact that it just tucks up out of the way is totally awesome. Behind it, I've got a hydraulic table lift. Back blowout a couple of years ago, and again, one of my drivers to this company and to the shop was I was an avid motorcycle rider, and I mean thousands of miles a year, and had to break away from that when I hit a back injury and realized a 6-year-old and motorcycles don't always equate necessarily the biggest thing. And so I was like, I need to dig in a little bit more with hobby. But I also I can't always lift all this heavy stuff and make sure I maintain my back strength. So nice pickup on Facebook Marketplace was this hydraulic lift table. So it helps me, especially if I'm unloading stuff out of a truck or just moving some things around in here. Awesome casters, awesome lift capacity, gets to the right height. It's just about the height of all the stuff here, which is sitting right around that 35-inch height, which is what I try to keep it to, so it all works. So all that is crammed into here. I've got my fold-up table, I've got my workspace underneath, I've got my hydraulic lift table tucked over into the side here. I've got my small dust collector piece. So all that lives right here and works really, really well. Again, behind it, I've got all the entertainment piece, kind of resource center all in one, which is, again, closest to my main work area. So I work here. If I need to look something up, I could pop over and I could do so without kind of this long, excursion through the shop there. So that hits this area, right? And I think that this works really, really well, at least for my setup. All right, so now hitting on kind of my next area. As I said, this is probably my most multifunctional workspace. Once I built this, it was rivaling the amount of time that I was spending at the main workbench. That probably still holds as my main spot just because of the fact that it's a nice flat surface. So if I'm using it for a desk or so on and so forth, that works really, really well. But especially when it comes to clamping things down or I just need a quick hold of something, this has turned out to be just really kind of a fantastic kind of core piece. Sorry for the continual use of kind of, but this becomes a core piece of what I use. So what is it? So as I said earlier, kind of years of playing around with old vintage Vespas and Lambrettas, and then moving into a lot of time on motorcycles. Me preferring to do the bulk of my own work, not all of it. Sometimes time got in the way. I got a motorcycle lift years ago so that I can handle pretty much all the stuff. And I've always liked working on things. So had the motorcycle lift. Well, then what happens is I back away from that much time on two wheels. Yeah, I still have an old Vespa, but the maintenance is pretty minimal, and it's not. I don't need this up here all the time. Second off, I'm just not. I tried to detach myself from the bikes and not be constantly having it, as my core hobby. So I'm just not out here working on this stuff as much. So what do you do with the lift? I could sell the lift, sure, right? Get pennies on the dollar for what I paid for it. This was one of the ones I actually bought new, got it on sale, so lucky me. But this was decade and a half ago or so that I bought this. So I could sell it, sure. What happens if, my goal is son graduates high school, I'll eventually get back into riding. Me being me, I'm going to want another lift. So why take the hit down the road and have to buy again? So what I ended up doing was always leaving this here. At the point in time, I had my Jeep parked in here, and that would stay all the way down to the ground. Jeep would be able to park over it. All was good. Really was not in the way. Well, then I started to look at how can I use this more functionally within the shop. Well, Harbor Freight, no affiliation, but Harbor Freight came out with these welding tables within the past year or so. And so I looked at them and decided I'm going to grab two of them. I'll bolt them together. So I've got this long workspace. It'll work well for for my welding spot, right, where I need to be able to be in here. Nice open spot, space for the machines, space for me to be able to work. I've also able to adjust the height according to what I'm working on. So that also became kind of a unique piece, is I've got a welding table with adjustable height. And that goes directly on top of the motorcycle lift. Now, for some reason, I need to bring the Vespa in, and I can kick this off, slide it off. Sure, it's heavy, but it's doable. And I've got my workspace back on the actual lift to do its sole purpose. So that's where this has worked well, is being able to give me my lift, also give me my welding space, but also just in general, another workbench where I can clamp and use it, really as a fixturing table. Now, an additional thing that comes really, really well with this is because of the fact that I could lower this down. Behind here, these are on wheels as well. So I had these on. I'm a big fan of furniture dollies because it's a cheap, easy way to get things onto wheels. It's going to cost me more in casters than to pop down to Harbor Freight and just buy kind of a pre-built furniture dolly with casters already on it. So when I picked these up, I immediately put them onto furniture dollies so that I could move them out. Well, behind here, I have my two Festool MFT3 track saw tables, right? And I've got actually a video that'll launch here soon where I am setting those up here, right? And where I'm able to then continue to use this exact same workspace is I can lower this table down, and my MFTs will straddle this, right? So I have them side by side. So I have a pretty significant workspace, but they straddle this work table by this lowering down. So in this one area, I essentially have a workbench as needed at any given time. I've got a welding fixturing table. I've got my motorcycle lift. And I'm also able to use this for my track saw setup. And I've got a lot of workspace around it to be able to get the wood in and do all the cuts that are necessary and have space for the tracks and all that piece. So that gives me a ton of flexibility within this one area. And that's still early on, right? I can also set this as well with, I showed you that, collapsible kind of workbench where I can throw plywood on and do cut downs on that. Well, I can get this to the exact same height as that. So that also works really well. Currently have riding behind it is a table saw. And so that, again, I set that up so that this could even drop down as the same height as that and serve as in-feed or outfeed table, depending upon which way I flip the saw as needed, if I were to be cutting a relatively long piece, right? Will I need to? Doubtful, but I can. And I think that was one of the biggest points, was I can if I needed to. It is a function of the shop that exists based off of the way that I had set that up. But also as well, like I said, with my two MFTs side by side, and then this table saw living at the end of it, that also is the exact same height, not only as my collapsible, but it's also the same height as my MFTs, which then allows that again to serve as a in-feed or out-feed table, right? So a lot of functionality that exists in here. Threw a clamp onto here as well. Don't need the biggest one. I've got one over on the other table, but this is a nice kind of piece to have just as a quick hold for something. So that also works really, really well. I've also got some kind of unique storage underneath. So there's a gap that lives below here. And so I can have things like my welding rods. I've got some legs from my shop smiths, which we'll talk a little bit about shortly. And those are areas where it's like, I don't have a great spot to put those, and that's dead space. So I was able to maximize using the space on that there. And then behind me, a couple of things, right? So over here to my right is just some rolling pieces. Some, all these companies have moved over to like these, pack out style systems, I think is what Milwaukee calls them, no affiliation. And I can use that to store certain things. That tends to hold most of my woodworking stuff, especially for the MFT table. But it's on wheels. So that gets to move anywhere around the shop and has some awesome casters. So I could just shove it completely out of my way and it'll it'll keep going until it bumps into something. So that works really well. Doesn't normally live in front of that door. But it can while I'm working. Normally it's tucked away in another area. But if I go to work in that area, this needs to have a home, and that's a great spot for it. I also have, which I showed in the first walk around piece, it's where my sewing machines are. So I've got a, nice old vintage Singer 201 in there. And I've also got a nice Sailrite that exists in there. So both have their purposes, and they just fit into that spot. And then, as I said, I've got a beer cooler right below that, and so that really should be the center focus of this whole video and the whole shot. But that area works out really, really well. I picked up these really nice old vintage storage cabinets, which work good for holding just small stuff. And I haven't even set these up entirely. Like, as I find things that I need to put into there, they go in and then I label them. A lot of them are unused, a lot of them are unlabeled, but it works for what I need. I've got some extra tooling pieces that are in here that are all associated really with the MFT table, so it keeps them in close access for what I'd be using. Some parallel guides, piece that works with this domino tool and all that. So it's all very accessible, very close to the exact area that I would be working on. And then I said directly behind there are my actual MFT tables, 2 of them being stored behind there. And it fits absolutely perfectly, and works really, really well. And, you'd say like, yeah, but then you've got to move everything and then pull those tables out and set them up. Sure. That's the issue of working in this size shop. It would be fantastic to say either one, to have this 10,000 square foot shop where I'd never have to do that. Or 2, if I really was only setting this up to be a woodworking only, then yeah, I wouldn't have to pull those out, set them up for use, and then put them away when I'm done. But I need to have more than just those, able to be used, and the chances of me also having to do my welding table with a scooter on a motorcycle lift plus the MFT all at the same time, pretty unlikely, right? If it had to be done, could make it work. I could take this down to one size, move it over to my main workbench, have the scooter over to here, and I can set my MFTs up over into this other area. Pretty unreasonable that I would think I would ever have to actually do that. But it's there if needed. All right, next is this kind of part of the shop space. So table saws here. Behind it, I've got a planer. So that allows, and it's on wheels, right? So both of these are on wheels. I can move them and shift them around and get them into the spot wherever I need them to work best. But it works well into this area where I am doing bulk of the woodworking. That would be something that, because it's on wheels, I wouldn't run it over there. Just space-wise up against the wall it's just not the spot for a planer. But I'd be able to move that out and get that set up into the right spot where I feel I could do it, which could even be in a driveway depending upon which job I'm doing. But that gives me a lot of flexibility having that on wheels. It does keep it pretty close to nearby on here. Here is my kind of one of my favorite tools here. I picked this up. A couple buddies of mine were closing down their fab shop where they were creating some parts for some motorcycles, and this was one of the equipment pieces left over, and I just absolutely loved it. It was something I was after. It's basically a grinder polisher. Big old piece from the 40s. It's just awesome. It just does its job, and it does it well. When I got it, 220 223 phase, which wouldn't work here. And so what I ended up doing was adding a VFD to it, which A, allows me to run it here, but B, it gave me the ability to adjust that speed down to whatever it is that I was working on. It's a phenomenal thing for getting surface finishes right on some of the metalworking parts that I'm doing. So that has been just an awesome piece. Every time I turn it on, it just runs the way it's supposed to do. They just don't make things anywhere close to as good as that is Back over into this area is, you know, and it really starts with this piece here moving over. It's the messy area, right? This is where things are going to get kind of dirty, and you don't want this stuff getting into your other machines around the shop. So I've got the mini belt sander with the small disc sander, little 6-inch, and so on and so forth. I have that set up permanently for metal finishing. So it just keeps that type of paper and band connected to it, which is nice, you know, kind of wet dry piece in there with a really fine finish. I also have a bench grinder, so set that up where I've got typical grinding wheel along with a Scotch-Brite wheel on the other side. Allows me to get things to size, also allows me to get that finish that I'm after on that. And then lastly over here was taking the bandsaw, just again picking this one up at you know, Harbor Freight, getting no affiliation with them. And then a company called Swag 4x4, I think if I got their name correctly, makes this really cool bench where you could take that and mount it to it, so it becomes more of an upright. So this works really well for cutting down smaller pieces, and that's mostly what I'd ever be cutting is small pieces. And this gets tremendous amount of use. I have it set up on a foot pedal, so it's really easy for working up, especially since it's mounted. I don't have a lot of control on, you know, where the switch is and so on and so forth. So just Velcro the switch down to permanently be on, and I activate it through a foot switch, you know. And then something I said, I have a 6-year-old, so I've got to be super cautious, especially in this area, that none of this stuff is just the foot pedal. It's not just a walk up and hey, you know, next thing I know, I've got a child with missing limbs, right? So making sure that in most cases that, you know, I tend not to have it always powered up unless I know for a fact I'm going to be working in that area. For certain, a bit of a pain where you're constantly having to plug things in and get that going. But it's a whole lot less of a pain, no pun intended, than your kid losing limbs, right? Because you left that in. So this space has worked really, really well. I cannibalized some old wall cabinets that are hanging up on the other side, and use those to house all the stuff that goes with these pieces. So it's got all the polishing pads and sandpaper grit and collars and so on and so forth to make all of this function and work the way it's supposed to. And again, threw them on wheels, just grabbed some furniture dollies, threw them onto there, bolted them down. These things can move around incredibly quick and incredibly easy, which also, you know, just allows, if I need to reconfigure, if I need to do some cleaning, because this is a messy area, I can just pull this out, sweep behind it, blow behind it, I'm good to go. We get that spot kind of back to the way it should be on that. So a cool setup in this area. Next up is our couple of these are Shopsmiths. Both this and this are Shopsmiths tools. I first learned of Shopsmith a couple of years ago, and once I saw it, I was like, that's just cool. I have this love, which we kind of moved through, of just old vintage American tooling, especially the tooling that was, the intended purpose was that home DIYers, you know, Craftsman, Shopsmith, all of these type of companies that kind of fit that bill of being that piece, which was like, how do we get this product into the consumer's hands so they can do all this stuff? And back in the times when this stuff was built, it was built to last. It was, you'll hear in some videos out there, these are generational pieces. These are, or multi-generational pieces. They're intended to not only last for your lifetime, but to move on past that. This particular one here is from 1956. This one's a little bit newer. As I got into the Shopsmiths, me being me, I also was like, hey, what's kind of the best that they have to offer from a functional standpoint? This thing gets all the style points, still super usable, super functional, don't get me wrong. This one, I don't know, maybe a little bit less in style and more on function. So it was a bit of concession on that. But I eventually moved to this and then went back and took the 1956 and actually did what was called making it into a shorty. Got a video that'll launch a bit on that as well, is taking this down because I just did not have the space to have another full-size machine in here. This allowed me to cut it down, and it's much easier to store. So back behind the previous where I went through like my welding table with some cabinets behind it, this actually wheels very nicely right in between those, totally up and out of the way in an area that I'm not always working. So that works really well. But then if I am in a spot where I'm working on pieces, say I am working on this particular Shopsmith, I've got this other one behind me. So we're taking a machine that is, its intended purpose is to be multifunctional, right? This thing, and I'm not going to list out everything, so for all the Shopsmith gurus, I'll miss something. I get that. But this could do table saw. This could do, it folds up and does drill press. I could do routing. I could do shaping. I could do sanding. I could do lathe work. I could do bandsaw. This bandsaw is connected to that. I could do jigsaw. There's just a wealth of stuff that could be done with these. Sure, you're going to have setup time, but this gives me, what, 7, 8, 9, 10 tools in one. I've got to move and I've got to store some of the components, but it's still taking up way less space than having an individual bandsaw, and then an individual table saw, and then an individual jigsaw, and then a lathe, and for wood lathe, and so on and so forth. So this puts it all into one kind of compact area, and it does it all. That's what I love about kind of the use of this. There is a YouTube channel called My Growth Rings. Great space to learn more about kind of how to use these more than I would want to get into here. So why do I have two? Well, my original thing was to have this one primarily set up as a table saw and leave it as that. That way I didn't have to get into adjusting tables all the time and squaring up and doing all that. And so then I decided to take this other one, which I would not use as a table saw. And this could be set up to run things like my jointer. It could run my disc sander. It could run my belt sander, which is right here. I could even take those pieces off, put this table and this table, and have a nice workspace. Bunch of areas where that was going to come in, which is why I decided to go for two. You'll also find that you could spend as little or as much as you want on these things, right? So brand new with, I ended up upgrading this. I got a really good deal on what's called the power head. So it takes it from this mechanical, kind of throttle control or variable speed to this full electronic. I don't have the touch screen version, which they have out now, but to me, it added a ton more use out of that piece. So I upgraded to that. But if you buy brand new, you're going to spend a fair amount of money. You could also go and jump on Facebook Marketplace, jump on Craigslist, jump on OfferUp, jump anywhere that stuff is for sale, garage sales, and you'll see these things for free. You'll see them for $50. You'll see them for $100. So it's a great way to get into a tool and just wait around and get the stuff on the cheap, so you're not in it a whole ton of money. And that's, I did that where I ended up buying a handful of these machines just so I can get some of the accessories that I wanted to build this out to a full-blown system. And then I would sell off the whole machine or the parts or whatever it was that I wasn't using. And through that, I've ended up with some really unique pieces, right? Some brand new in the box stuff, some, Shopsmith throughout the decades. They started, I think it was in the 40s. This, what's called the Mark V, started in the 50s, which was cool. It was local here in the SF Bay area, is where they actually started by a company called Magna. Did not know that before I got into them. They've done a lot of different things to build these systems out throughout the years. Some of the stuff gets discontinued. You run across it, and it's just unique, well thought out pieces on that. So that's why I have two, and that's why there's two different pieces. Now, I'd say, but wait a minute. This was set up as a table saw, permanent table saw. Didn't we just see a table saw? We did. So hold on. Let's look at that. Because I picked that up in recent times, kind of unexpectedly, and there was specific reasons to that, right? So I ended up with this here, which is the saw stop. This is actually the smallest saw stop that they make. This is it's called a CTS. And so the CTS is super compact. That's what it stands for, compact table saw. But it has the technology that when set up correctly and you have all of the stuff turned on and you haven't bypassed it, I'm going to save my digits, right? I like this finger. I'd like to keep it around for a little bit longer. I also talked about earlier how I plan to teach my son various skills. I want him to be able to use a table saw. Growing up, you know, I'd always say like I'd say it now, like, I don't think my dad knew what side of a screwdriver to use. You could hand it to him and I don't think he'd know which side to put into the screw and actually use. That wasn't anything he was able to do. So we learned along the way because there was a lack of money to make, you know, to go pay somebody. Plus, I don't know, some hidden desire to just accomplish things on your own. So I want to build Quinn into that, but this allows, if it detects skin, it shuts the blade, it retracts the blade, stops it, so on and so forth. So from a safety perspective, I was all after this. Again, who wouldn't want the biggest and the best? They make fantastic cabinet saws. I've played around with them in the past. No sponsorship whatsoever, but I played around with them in the past. Hey, if they want to send me one and give me one, I'll take it. I love the technology that exists, but in my current setup, I couldn't make a full cabinet saw work without giving something else up. Like, I do have a backup plan. I can theoretically make it work. Some things would have to finagle and move around, but I'm not doing production cabinets. I'm not doing, you know, production furniture making. I need this for doing what it's going to need to do, which is going to make a variety of cuts. I've used it a handful of times in the couple of weeks I've had it. And it's going to serve its purpose really, really well. Spent a fair amount of time. The person that I bought it from, again, bought this used, I could tell spent a good amount of time setting themselves up with the how to configure it and get it so it's cutting at 90 degrees, and I spent a little bit more time on it. So this thing is as precise as I absolutely need it to be. And then I built the table for it. This is, you know, just quick. I've got it set up so it's multi-function. You know, set height, including the rolling stand, so that it matched the MFT tables. I can store my router, kind of benchtop routing table directly underneath it, access from the backside, so I roll it out and pull it. And then I was able to put my my pocket hole jig hanging off the side of it. So this piece also worked well to, again, be that multifunction that I'm after, while at the same time hold as much as I possibly could. So this has been a kind of a cool piece for me to add on for this side of it, and why I went with this versus setting up the table saw on the Shopsmith. I won't need that on that other, the bigger model. I'll do like 99% of my cuts on here than I would on the Shopsmith. And the Shopsmith is totally accurate. The Shopsmith is a great table saw, as precise as you could set it up to be or need it to be. But the only difference is the technology where this, I can't cut hot dogs, so watch videos, you understand what I'm saying. I won't cut off my fingers, right? Where I can't, you know, I'm not going to get that out of any other brand currently. If we were going one for one and that technology didn't exist, I would 100% say with the Shopsmith, because I'm just really getting this massive workspace and so on and so forth. So that is kind of why I've got the double Shopsmiths. It's also why I've now also got the additional table saw in here, which is going to change the way I will end up using this guy, right? So that will still find its use. It's going to see a little bit more of the other functions. I've done some upgrades on it, which will give it some really good flexibility as well. All right, so my next space comes into here. So this falls onto the back side of my workbench, which you're seeing here. I actually had this recently, just packed with some kind of toolboxes and such, and I wanted to get things a little bit lower, which is also why I configured it this way. So my my original build out plan was nowhere close, not even close to where I'm at right now. I had a whole other plan in place of where I was going after. My tooling was going. I was going to go after a company called Precision Matthews. After doing a lot of research, I felt that was going to give me my best bang for my buck. No affiliation, Precision Matthews. If you'd like to send me some equipment, would love to take it. But those pieces were ones that I originally intended to build out. If you look at their colors, they're typically like blue and white. So then I was going to go through and buy some new toolboxes. I was going to buy some blue ones, nice wood tops on them, and the toolboxes were going to be on this side, and then against the wall I'd build in a workbench where I'd have the lathe on top of it. I would actually put the mill on top of it and set everything up that way. I spent a bunch of time drawing it out, first on just a grid paper, transferred that over to Excel, and was sure I could use SketchUp and so on and so forth. But I was using these pieces because it was quicker for me. So I was doing that, and then from there, I would come out and start to lay it out and set it up, and it was interesting because it was a toolbox, this one, that changed my entire layout on what I was going to do and the tools I was going to use. And so what that was my first toolbox. I had that 30 some odd years, first real toolbox, shall I say. So I've had that thing for like 30 years, and I don't normally get nostalgic on things. They're just stuff. If I don't use them, I get rid of them, type of thing. But as I started to be in a position where I would not use that, I don't know, I got tugged on, and I was like, oh, that's my toolbox. I can't get rid of that. But then I was like, oh, it's not going to match my blue and white theme. And so it just ended up completely changing everything that I was doing. And instead of going with these brand new machines, I ended up deciding to go the other way around, which was to build it out with more vintage tooling. And the layout also changed just simply because of the fact that that's a tall toolbox. It has to be up against the wall. If I put it out here, which I could do, it created this really high wall, and I like to have it more open. So that's why this layout is the way it is, and the way I also cleared the stuff I had up here, because it was probably about this tall. I was losing my openness, where if I'm working back over there, I could still look out and it feels more open. It didn't feel like this crammed, condensed piece. So trying to utilize that space and also have it feel really, really good. So that worked out. I worked years of retail prior to, I now teach, and then prior to getting into teaching, I worked years of retail. I would lean on layout and design of this almost 100% to my years in retail, where you were trying to maximize space and functionality. So what do we have here? Aside from some storage up top, which I tried to bring it down to low things, just a decorative piece I picked up from a shop that was going out of business. He was making these, super cool piece. I throw all my camera pieces in here. Previously I had those on my workbench, which I absolutely hated. So now I got those off my workbench, got them over here, got my high boxes off of here. So it lowered that down. So a lot was accomplished with that. And then I have my dial gauges in here. They're all magnetic based, so they sit perfectly onto this, which works really, really well for me. And all my measuring stuff, I just feel like I'm always measuring things now. So just having access to those works. I could pop them up when I do actually need them, where their intended use case would be the lathe and the mill. But I leave them. They live here for right now. Below here is where I've got almost all the stuff for my shopsmith, pretty well organized. And I'll show this one because this one's organized. I've got a lot of drawers in here that are not organized, right? So having the ability to have all this stuff just kind of in here and set up. So this is all the various components, right? Using dividers to set up my Shopsmith. So quick access, right? Because it's just right around the corner and I'm there and I have access to that. So that's worked really well. Earlier I showed the cabinets I had behind my welding table. So I bought those and this all in one shot from Facebook Marketplace for a fantastic price, and it's worked really well for storage. Below it I've got things like the saw blades, which keeps it right in the right area, and then just various like holding jigs and probably a crap show down into there. Next over is the 3D printer, one of my favorite pieces. Like that's actually one where I'll sit back and be like, oh, I haven't 3D printed in a while. And I'll just go through a phase where I'm printing out various things. Some of them functional and usable, some of them just for the hell of it. Coolest thing when I got this was my son coming in saying, so wait, so we could just pretty much make anything? Like if I break a toy, or we can come out here and fix stuff? That was all I needed to know I was going in the right direction. So that's where I ended up with this. I had no intent on getting the 3D printer when I did, but and the biggest reason is I don't know CAD design. Like I had no idea on how to do that. Every time I think I even tried to use SketchUp, which is why I used Excel to lay this out, it just didn't make sense to me. It just did not work. And I was like, I can't get a 3D printer. I mean, sure, I could go on places like, Printables and Thingiverse and print up everybody else's stuff, but I could never design my own stuff. I don't know how to. But a deal popped up, could not pass it up. So I ended up grabbing this. And then, one of the biggest reasons I also didn't want to buy it is I knew if I did get one, I was going to go down the rabbit hole of trying to learn CAD design. And I spent like 40 hours each week for the next 2 weeks learning how to use various tools to be able to design my own stuff and print. So that's worked really well because it taught me how to do that. And I'm still very fresh and new at doing CAD design, but I think it also serves as a segue that if I ever decide to go CNC on any of my other stuff, I'll have a backbone to work on some of that foundation through that CAD design and understanding its use. But that's helped me with also building some stuff for around the shop. I'll look at one of my storage pieces. So great spot for it to live here. And just even looking at things like power, I've got a pull down power plug right here. So when I go to use this, I just drop down, plug in. I throw a sewing machine light, which comes right through the glass, plug that in, and then this lights up significantly better than the original setup. And then the storage below that is I got like a drawer for this, for the type of stuff I would use in here. Then I've got things for like, airbrush and painting, hand painting, paint brushes, all that type of stuff I have into there on that as well. And an interesting thing on that, I've had this metal cabinet for over 30 years. Somehow, somewhere along the way, I picked it up, and I'd never seen another one. And then one popped up for $20 on Facebook Marketplace, and I was able to acquire that. And so it worked good because it matched pretty close to the other one, slight height different, but it's also worked well for the storage that exists into here, right? And then as we look over, we're looking at the side of one of my toolboxes that holds some of the machining stuff, but then this also gives me just a quick landing spot as I'm working on. So if I'm working here, get you turned, if I'm working over in here, right, and I need to set something down, I can do so. This also works really well when I'm working in the machines, that I can use this also as another really good landing spot. So I've tried desperately not to fill that piece in. It's always my temp holding area within there. So this all functions super, super well. All right, we'll actually end up closing out in the same area that we started with. And this is probably one of the first areas I started to set up. Some of the first machines that I brought in. The lathe was one of the first ones that I ended up acquiring and setting this area up. Again, this was not my original design by any means, but I really dig how it turned out. on that. So just looking at what we have along the way, right? So, you know, this nice small compressor. I bought this for the airbrushing, and I could have bought one of the smaller, a little bit more easily portable ones to bring into there, but I felt that this was going to give me a little bit more functionality in other areas, right? So if I wanted to, let's say I was using a nail gun, this is going to be able to run a nail gun, right, as well, plus be small enough and be portable, where I wouldn't get that if I just bought the small airbrush only. So, you know, that's able to live up here. It's just light enough to get up there. I wouldn't want it any heavier. It's also small enough to get up and be completely, you know, completely out of the way. Let's look at some other things that I store along the top here. As I said, I've got my third sewing machine that exists over in here, just because it doesn't fit over there. And I looked over and said, hey, empty spot. So that's a nice Singer featherweight, super small, super compact. Love that. An old vintage Craftsman router that was actually more of like a decorative piece than a usable piece. That's probably got to go on its way out. Here I had picked up a used Sherline mill and a used Sherline lathe. I've actually got a video that will launch about my purchase of those, as well as me completely stripping them apart, cleaning it down, making them functional, getting them to the condition that they need to actually be to work as their intended purpose was. They were just neglected. They weren't heavily used. They were just neglected, right? And then back in the corner here, I've got my 1948 Craftsman drill press. This, I was doing a van build out a few years ago, and I needed a drill press. My little benchtop one was not going to cut it, and so I ended up acquiring this one. Better fit to look at this with a reversed camera angle than where we're at. So this, as I was saying, was one of my first pieces that I bought. I was doing my van build, and I needed to drill some aluminum extrusion, and my little bench top was not going to cut it. That thing was all over the place. So I started to look at drill presses, and I was like, oh, this thing's going to it's going to be expensive to get anything good, or I'm going to spend quite a few $100 at like a Harbor Freight and get something that was just pretty inadequate. And then I ran across this, which it was a guy that was originally a machinist, and upon retirement he was reconditioning just old tooling and selling it, and so I picked this up, and I just absolutely, I just love this thing, right? The design style that goes in, you know, into that, and you know, the coloring of the handles here. This is like a kind of a deep burgundy color. It just looks really, really good and works really good. Recently, I acquired this, which was a Craftsman, Sears Craftsman, I call it a milling bed, and I used to have this kind of XY axis clamp or vise on there that was just, it was horrible to use. It was either super tight and chunky or so sloppy. I ended up picking this up, and so I don't do milling with it because I have the other machine, but this allows me to just get all of my pieces set up exactly where I need them to be, lock it down, and we're good to go on that there. And then my big compressor that I've had there. Some of the other stuff that exists into here. This is got a couple wood stools just for people if they come over and hang out. We've got a spot to sit, but this piece here is something that I made. This is actually a camera and light jig, right? So all run off of ram mounts using some conduit down to another furniture dolly. Well, and then I ended up getting this Goal Zero kind of gasless generator off of a buddy of mine. And so now what I can do is I can run my phone camera there, I can run a light up there, and they can all power off of that. So it works really, really good. And it's on wheels, so I can wheel this around the shop and catch whatever video shots that I'm aiming to get as I'm doing things. So that works out super, super good. Love all the supers I use there. And then here is my milling machine. So this is the Grizzly. Picked this one up used, actually from the same person I got my lathe, right? So I bought the lathe, and that was an interesting story, but I got the lathe, saw they had the mill, and ended up going back like 2 days later and grabbing that. And that mill was something I had always wanted. So I jumped in immediately and was playing around with that, and got a fair amount of tooling, which worked really, really well. So that that's been a good piece for me, and just the right size for kind of the stuff that I'm doing. Like, again, like, who wouldn't want, you know, a big CNC machine, or a nice big manual Bridgeport or something, you know, an old vintage Bridgeport. Space and money just couldn't warrant it, especially in a spot where I'm learning it. This fit the bill. It already had the DRO set up on it. Everything just worked really, really well. And the guy was cool that I picked it up from, so that was good. Living behind that, and I tucked in my dust collection for all the woodworking, and this works really good. This particular one I liked when I saw it pop up on Facebook Marketplace, is because it is all one self-contained unit on wheels. It couldn't have been better built for kind of my shop and my use case than this. Total crapshoot with my hoses and all that. That's like a whole other project. I kind of got this prematurely. I wasn't quite ready for it, but I've used it. I mean, it works perfectly on all the wood tools, but it's just not efficient. I have to pull everything. I don't move the machine, but I got to pull all the hoses out and set everything up. And so that's a whole other project in itself. And then I've got the South Bend lathe. This is my 1965 South Bend lathe. Absolutely love this thing. Ended up adding the DRO setup to this. Found a nice light for sale, which was kind of almost period correct on that. So this is just in fantastic shape. Done a couple of upgrades with this. I did not want to go CNC initially. A couple of reasons. One, as I've stated, I didn't know how to do CAD. But the other thing was also that I wanted to learn this stuff from a manual state. I had run a lathe minimally previously, right? I had run a mill minimally previously. But to get into a point where I actually have my own and I can come out and do stuff, I wanted to learn it manually. When I first got this thing, I was spending hours a day for weeks just learning how to get surface finish down, and then, you know, learning how to get angles down, and then learning how to hit my correct measurements. And so a lot of learning went on with this particular machine, which is also still a super functional machine for almost anything that I would need. And I love that this one had the cabinet. So again, buying one that was used, I got a really good deal on this, but it was interesting because I ended up buying this and another South Bend from 1938, both on the same day. So I found this one from 38, was going to be just this, that was going to be the lathe I was going to get. Tons of tooling came along with it, worked a deal with the person, I was going to go buy it, and then this thing popped up in the morning. And so why did I go with this one? Well, the other one was my wording, I'm sure, is all incorrect, a Model 9, and this was the 10 Light, and one of the biggest differences, besides just being the size from 9 to 10, was it had the quick change gearbox for threading and so on and so forth, where the other one was all gear changes to be able to do that. And I was just like I would absolutely prefer that, especially kind of being new to it. Like, it would just be easier, but I had already committed to the other person, so I ended up buying both. Which worked out for me really, really well, because I was able to bring in the other one, which had tons of tooling. I kept all the tooling and was able to resell that lathe for what I paid for it. So all that tooling ended up coming to me at no cost. And the kind of the last area as we zip around here would be, here's where I have all some of the tooling and stuff that I would be using either with the mill or or the lathe, right? So that's all accessible right here, and then a few more pieces that I have in here. So, you know, some show-off bits. I was able to, you know, all of these trays and such were ones that, you know, I made once I started to learn how to do some of the CAD stuff and make these on the printer, and, you know, add in my company, you know, MAQR there, which, so it gave me really good use, keeps me organized on things throughout, you know, even for my small stuff. I was able to make, you know, this small bit holder, playing around with different logos and such in there, and it just worked really, really well for me. So that kind of closes things out as far as, you know, this shop tour. All right. Also, as I was saying, that closes us out. Maybe a little bit long-winded. As I said, I teach. I just stand up and I can ramble for hours. That's what I'm paid to do. But I do hope through this that there was some level of entertainment, seeing some of the stuff, seeing you know, just the layout and at least the mindset behind everything, where it was multifunctional. I think we broke away from some of that multifunction a bit as I came over into this area. A lathe is going to do lathe things. I mean, you know, it's not going to, you know, be a secondary to serving as a, well, actually I could make a motor where it's a, where it powers something else, but you get what I'm saying, right? So some of the areas are going to be multi-use, multi-function. Some of them are just absolutely not going to be. And I think something like, you know, a lathe and a mill, they're going to do lathe and mill things, where at the same time, they're going to allow me to build out things that are going to give me more function within that. We'll get in another time where I'll get a little bit deeper into like tool storage and such like that, and kind of the layout of how I try to store things and organize. Those are ongoing. There's times I feel pretty good and I have a drawer that I open up and I feel good about it, and then I open up the next drawer and I'm like, oh my God, and it just gets crowded out because I might have acquired something else for that particular drawer, and it just no longer works, right? So I need to work on some of that as well. I also hope that when you look at, you know, how to look at your own space, you know, I've talked with a lot of people over the years. I've always had, to a degree, some level of a workspace. You know, at one point in time, this area here was my motorcycle lift, and the other side I had, you know, 15 bikes lined up. You know, old Vespas, Lambrettas, Harleys, BMWs, right, all lined up in that area. And I was always, you know, this was my workspace, and tried to build that out to be as efficient as possible. So I've always had a shop. Go back before that, I had a shop where it was just a hobby shop where I had some of my old cars, and we were working out in Santa Clara and had a shop out there. And prior to that, I had a shop called South Bay Scooter Works when I was like 19 years old. Me and a couple of buddies, you know, we opened that. So I've always had shop space. I've always been working, but I don't think I've ever had it to this extent. And I've definitely not ever had anything that this was like multifunctional, right? Where I can go do wood, I could go do metal, I could go do 3D printing, I could go do some airbrushing, and all of those pieces, and then some, right? There's even more within there. So I hope some of the, you know, what you see, it gives you some ideas on like, hey, I could actually make my shop bring in more stuff. Maybe there is another inch in the shop that I could add another tool, or reconfigure something so that I can get a couple things like my welding table that works as, you know, where I could put my track saw table as well as my motorcycle lift, right? And you can look at areas like that, or you have just some ideas on how to buy, right? On how to look for some of the used equipment versus buying new, especially if you're learning, right? Why go buy, you know, a machine that's $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, you might buy it and realize like it's just not for you. Well, could you have accomplished the same thing through spending $700, $800 on a Craigslist buy that you get your money or more back on? And I think that's another approach. I think it's kind of like the art of buying. I said I've got a couple of videos popping up. One's going to be on the Shoreline mill and lathe that I ended up buying off Craigslist, and these are tabletop size, right? They're meant to do small pieces, but making that purchase on Craigslist, as well as what it would take to clean that up. And I talk a little bit in that video about how to make these buys, how to put the effort into, cleaning up as a way to save yourself a bunch of money, but at the same time, like me stripping those down completely, I saved money and I learned a ton about the machine. And I think that's some of the other stuff that goes on in here. As you're building this out, you learn a lot about what's going to work and what's not going to work. I've even been in a spot, not too much, because I try to be really cautious and not just going out and buying everything and anything. But I've been in a couple situations now where I'm able to start letting a few of the tools go that I've acquired, because either I pointed myself in a different direction and that tool is redundant to something else that I have, or is just something completely like sitting totally unused. And while it might show its face some point in time as being usable, it isn't today, and I probably have something else that could get the job done for that one-off occasion. Because one of my absolute, like, hands down biggest battles is I actually do, despite what the wife says, I don't like owning a bunch of stuff. I actually don't. And so what I tend to do is, if I see something that isn't being used, I don't want to store it. I'd rather just sell it, right? To me, that's just money that's sitting there and it's space. I'm the one that likes an empty refrigerator versus a full refrigerator. I just think it looks cleaner. So that's also, my other battle is why I feel like I'm always cleaning a small shop, because it very quickly can feel dirty and cluttered. And that was also, my original layout was going to be these brand new machines sitting on these workbenches with these matching toolboxes, and next thing you know, I'm ending up with like vintage tooling. But I also feel like I created a personality and a character within the shop of the shop tools themselves, right? I do think that this has character, it has its personality, and it has its style, and so in doing so, it was like building that out so I could also replicate that throughout the shop. But in doing so, it's also very easy to make it feel like it's very cluttered. So I'm constantly in battle with myself over that. Anyhow, definitely running long on this. Most of my videos will probably be in the longer range. They're intended to just throw them on, listen to them in the background, use them for entertainment purposes. Feel free to reach out, throw some comments if you have any additional thoughts, you got questions on anything. More than happy to hit on that piece as well. Appreciate y'all tuning in, and I will see you on the next video I pop out. Appreciate y'all.